So Barbie and Oppenheimer are coming out on the same day because they're about the same thing. A split of America's golden age. I want to talk about Barbie and Oppenheimer for a quick second. I'm going to talk about Barbie and Oppenheimer for a quick second. The Barbie and Oppenheimer movies, everyone's been trying to relate them, and they can't relate them because they're fucking retards. Haas is the smart guy who's going to relate Barbie and Oppenheimer without having seen either movie. They're not even out yet. I'm going to talk about Barbie and Oppenheimer and how they're interrelated. Unironically, this is not a joke. I'm going to tell you how these movies are related. You're going to go into the theaters and watch these movies, and you're going to realize Haas Aldin was so correct. Let's begin. All right, Barbie. We're going to talk about Barbie. Okay, so what does the TV show, Twin Peaks, Stranger Things, there was this recent one, I forgot the name of it, it was that feminist undertone movie, I don't know, Fallout, the Fallout games, Fallout 3, Fallout 4. What's that movie from the 1990s about where everything's in black and white and they start seeing it in color? Pleasantville, that's what it is. What do all these movies have in common? What they all have in common, there's a very recurring theme in American cinema, and I think it goes to the 1990s was the first time this started happening. Could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure it started in the 90s. But there's a very recurrent theme in American culture, popular culture, cinema, video games, and TV about this kind of American Gnosticism, for lack of a better word. American Gnosticism. What is American Gnosticism? American Gnosticism begins with the portrayal of an idyllic and idealized 1950s. Everything is hunky-dory, so to speak, as they used to say it. Everything's clean. Everything's white, because it's a parable for white supremacy also. It's very patriarchal. It's a traditional nuclear family. Mom is, making food, and dad is grilling, and they have a lawn, white picket fence, and a nice green lawn. Everything seems like it's great. The idyllic and idealized 1950s. Everything's fine, right? Everything's fine. Honey, I'm home. Yeah, so that's the 1950s. Okay, so that's a very recurring theme to begin with. And then since the 1990s, they've portrayed this kind of idealization of the 1950s to such an extreme. This is also what you find in dystopian fiction in general, but there's an American version of that where it is so extreme that it becomes uncanny. Everyone is too one-dimensional. It's kind of like Herbert Marcuse's, that piece of shit, Herbert Marcuse, his one-dimensional man. Everything's one-dimensional, right? Nobody has any real depth of personality or individuality or character. Everyone's always smiling. And the other colors of the human personality are all repressed, right? So this is usually how it begins. It's like, first off, it's very uncanny. It's very uncanny. It's very abnormally happy. Okay, Stepford Wives is a perfect example, actually. I think it began in the 70s, right? It's the Stepford Wives, and they made a new version of the Stepford Wives recently, actually. Okay, so that's the beginning, okay? And then as the story progresses, you begin with this idyllic kind of communities, idyllic kind of American small town. The story continues, and things are not what they seem. That's why I'm calling it American Gnosticism very vaguely. It goes, things are not what they seem. Behind the surface of the idyllic, good, perfect community where everyone is so stupid and naive because they're happy, the real depth, subjectivity reveals itself. It's a grand conspiracy. There's a grand conspiracy of some kind going on where people are being trapped within this world. And, maybe there's variations to how things go wrong that ruin the fantasy. So in the Fallout games, what happens is that you have a very uncanny juxtaposition between the idealized 50s culture and the aftermath of a devastating nuclear war where there's mutants and all these destroyed society with all these monsters and all this kind of decay and crime, where all these remnants from the old society are still there. The smiling cap, what is it? Pip-Boy. And he's smiling with a thumbs up. But the juxtaposition is with a kind of, nuclear... Yeah, Bioshock is a great example of it as well, right? This is a very cheap theme in American, very overused. It's American Gnosticism. The other examples you can think of are Oh God. You have Stranger Things is the actual important one that I'm going to use to bridge things, right? In the Stepford Wives, it's revealed that these women, the wives, are robots. In the recent one that I watched, it was a virtual reality simulation. The simulation theme is actually pretty common when it comes to these things. And behind the background of these idyllic communities is some kind of like maniacal scientists or aliens, or there's a cult of some kind. There's some deep kind of horror in the background that's being covered up. Things are not what they seem, and that's not good. This is also it's a very common theme in young adult fiction, especially new Netflix young adult fiction series. The 50s idealized idyllic American small town community, and things are not what they seem, and things go terribly wrong, which show a deep kind of horror behind this appearance of a utopia. That is a very, very strong theme in American contemporary, since the postmodern fiction, since the 1990s, we'd call it, right? So, what is it that's behind all of this? Well, you go and watch, I think the series Stranger Things, but other series do reveal this. The Fallout series, which is one of the most famous examples of this kind of ironical juxtaposition. Well, that one is the connection to Oppenheimer is very clear. It's just nuclear war, nuclear bombs. There's radiation from nukes. There's something about that that's very direct. Stranger Things, on the other hand, was extremely interesting. It's such a disgusting show that it is. There's also a Soviet dimension to it. So in Stranger Things, they repeat in one of its seasons, I forget which one, I think it was season 3, they do repeat the trope of the American Gnosticism, but instead of the 50s, they make it the 1980s, specifically in the form of a 1980s American mall, an idyllic, nice American mall in the 1980s. But it turns out that behind this mall, it's a Soviet spy program to collect data and conduct experiments on Americans. So it's a pretty direct thing. More interestingly, in Stranger Things, what you had is a nuclear plant. It's keyword nuclear, right? Nuclear plant behind the idyllic Stranger Things small town community, which was actually a cover for the government conducting experiments to unleash monsters from another dimension. And this is what the Soviets did as well. The Soviets had these labs where Soviet military authorities and leaders would force its atomic scientists to use their atomic technology to kind of rip open the fabric of reality and unleash the monsters from Stranger Things. And then, yeah, someone just mentioned it. I was going to get to that. In Twin Peaks, I think this was a conscious decision. Twin Peaks, if you don't know what it is, it's basically an idyllic, again, it's perfect, happy American small town community where things are not what they seem. There's a lot of horrible things going on in the background. And in Twin Peaks The Return, which is the latest series, Episode 8, which is one of the most beautiful pieces of cinema in the history of this country, if you ask me, portrays the origins of the malevolent entities plaguing the town of Twin Peaks. They're called Bob or Steve. I don't know the other guy's name. Forgot about it. Bob and Mike. Bob and Mike. Mike turned good. He lost his arm. But there's others kind of malevolent entities that are possessing people in Twin Peaks. Anyway, we see the origins of that in Twin Peaks The Return, Episode 8. And the origins of it are like in a 1950s nuclear experiment, where the U.S. government was conducting an experiment, testing a nuclear bomb. I think it was in the 40s or I forget when. And from this atomic blast, some kind of, portal was opened. Some kind of ripping into the fabric of reality happened that unleashed these malevolent entities that are responsible for the destruction and ruin, or at least the corruption, of the small, idyllic American town of Twin Peaks later on. So, I think we get a general idea, if we can kind of psychoanalyze it, this is too heavy of a word, if we can just kind of vaguely penetrate beneath the surface, we kind of see something about the atomic age of splitting the atom we associate for some reason with the splitting of America's golden age, America's good, America's sense of, idealized self. What is responsible for these associations? Well, I'll put it this way. The 1950s were marked by an era in the eyes of American popular consciousness today, an era of naivety, blissful naivety and happiness, where people did not realize the horror that they had unleashed. And I want to propose for a moment the idea that that horror is nothing more than the atomic age, which destroyed classical modernity itself. The atom, the splitting of the atom, the rise of modern physics, Einsteinian relativity, and also, on the other hand, modern physics, despite that the two are not reconciled, what we call quantum mechanics, the splitting of the atom. This was a severe break with classical, what we call classical modernity, upon whose foundation things like Newtonian physics rested. And also a view of the natural world according to which the world was comprised of particles, right? Atoms, like billiard balls, suspended into space, clashing with each other and interacting with each other in ways that are logically consistent. In quantum mechanics, the whole possibility of logical consistency completely disappears in the midst of both theoretical and experimental data, okay? So the data conflicts with what our limited sense of logic, at least within the frame of classical modernity, can afford and can handle, right? And ever since, we have never recovered from that, when you think about it. And actually, this is part of the book that I'm writing, not the one that's going to be released imminently, but the one that's probably going to release by the end of the summer, which is like years in the making. A lot of things happened vaguely in that time period we never recovered from. Okay, I'll name a few of the things we never recovered from. So I just mentioned we never recovered from quantum mechanics. We never recovered from splitting the atom. We never recovered from Einsteinian relativity. We're still coping about that to this day. Still trying to reconcile it with classical modernity and failing to do so. That's in the front of science. And then, okay, what else politically? What political event have we not recovered from? It's the October Revolution, of course. Leninism, or what we just call the October Revolution. Just like how the world didn't recover from the French Revolution for like a century, we did not recover from the Russian Revolution. We are haunted by the ghost of the Russian Revolution in the form of mass politics, pseudo-populisms, this kind of bizarre transformation of politics from something that's the result of a gentleman's disagreement of opinion into this kind of irreducible partisanship, which is de-individualized. You know, the October Revolution, which introduces this kind of strange and paradoxical relationship between consciousness and the object, between subject and object, between the party political representative and the political subject it's supposed to represent. And that, I mean, that's true across all ideologies. It's an objective event we have not recovered from. Liberal democracy today, as we speak, is being torn within and being undermined by this strange, demonic, malevolent force unleashed by the October Revolution, which destroys the basis of liberal democratic statehood in its own formal procedures. Today, nobody cares about the legitimate formal procedures of American democracy. We care about the hyper-partisan information warfare and, aestheticized politics of, mass culture. We care about who Beyonce tells us to vote for. We don't actually care about the people we vote for, or we care about Trump and his great grand personality. It's an era of personality, kind of aestheticized mass politics. Walter Benjamin said, this is why I don't like the Frankfurt School. Although I do kind of like Walter Benjamin, I don't like the Frankfurt School in general. Because almost everything they said about fascism actually applied to communism, which they didn't write almost anything about. The actual, real existing communism. Benjamin said that fascism was the aestheticization of politics. There's some truth to it. I get what he's saying in a deeper sense. But on the surface, it's not true for fascism specifically. It's true for Bolshevism. Bolshevism aestheticized politics. You think the Russian Revolution was just some people coming around according to the devices and faculties of logic and reason, being persuaded according to some precepts of, axiomatic logical procedures or something? No, they were won over because of the extremely intense and incisive propaganda of the Bolshevik Party, which spoke to their emotions. It spoke to something deeper than just pure logic, right? During the Russian Civil War, the manner by which the Red Army would win over the peasants, they would send propaganda trains, which would they were almost grotesque and so alien. They were just so loaded with propaganda, posters and music, loud, blaring sounds, all of this kind of, I mean, that was Bolshevism. That was not fascism, right? Actually, fascism mostly just copied that, you know? Fascism really just copied that. Right, anyway, to get back on track, not to go on a tangent about the Frankfurt School, I think the atomic age is a proxy, the splitting of the atom in particular, with nuclear weapons, that's a proxy for some fundamental split at the level of classical modernity itself. And therefore, at the level of American society as we know it, modern America as we know it, right? Some extreme paradoxical antagonism, some kind of historical rupture happens at this point where nothing is ever the same again. It's almost like modernity itself, but it's not quite modernity. This is why it's the object of post-modernity specifically. Even American postmodern literature actually began the theme of subverting the idealization of the 1950s and kind of adding, I remember reading a book in college, I forgot what it was, but it was like the real 1950s. Behind all of the veneer, everyone was on drugs, everyone was sexual pervert behind the scenes, people were getting raped and people are getting murdered, and it's actually a nightmare beneath the surface. That was actually defining for postmodern genre of literature itself. That's a defining theme. Now, another thing is that this is often very much applied to the Soviet experience as much as it's applied to the 1950s. It's applied to 20th century communism most of all. You have an idealized, even Atomic Heart falls into this theme. Atomic Heart shows an idealized alternate universe Soviet Union, and then what goes wrong? Something goes wrong. It's like BioShock, right? The robots get out of control, and then it becomes a horror. And you also have a similar thing going on for HBO Chernobyl, probably the most disgusting, but it's something's going on there, right? Chernobyl, now that I mention it, what was that? It was a nuclear meltdown, right? And Chernobyl was HBO's way of demythologizing the veneer of Soviet socialism as this glorious, mighty society. It would juxtapose the Soviet propaganda and the Soviet kind of ideals with this very grim, gray reality where everyone had British accents, where the skies are always gloomy, and this is the real world. George Orwell's 1984. The incompetence of the Soviet regime and its covering up of the truth. The politicization of science. All of these grim realities. That was HBO Chernobyl. But if you just kind of think a little more abstractly, it is copy and paste a few things, and it's the same postmodern genre of subverting a society's idealization of itself. Or it thinks it's doing this at least, right? It doesn't have to be the Soviet Union. It could be the American 1950s. It could be any kind of idealized representation of the 20th century that they will show and try to subvert. And this opens, and people who watch this feel subjectively engaged. When a midwit watches HBO Chernobyl, or watches Stranger Things, or watches these feminist movies, the new Stepford Wives movie, they're like, oh, I know that things are not what they seem. And then once things kind of go wrong, then they're like, I knew that. That's some real shit. Welcome to the real world. The real world is when I go to New York and I get jumped by a crackhead. Welcome to the grimy, dirty truth of the real world. All your ideals don't hold up. This is the real world. Okay, so once we get and enter into the real world, so to speak, once we enter into the real world, the themes, literary themes, become kind of this superficial, you just have to do what makes you happy, or it becomes some kind of like, forget about all these ideals and ideologies, man. I'm just glad we have each other. It becomes a kind of impotence, an acceptance of the impotence of humanity before the world. Some kind of ontologization of human virtue, in a sense. Like, what I mean by that is that heroism, morality, goodness, justice, all kind of become reduced to the intensity of interpersonal emotional bonds and these kind of deep, intimate connections. And it's at scale two extremes. On the one hand, it's like a love couple, or it's a family, and then so it's this, all of the kind of social or political ideals become the background of a story about personalities, right? Or it becomes the opposite extreme, where it's about a kind of deep connection to nature, ecology, the earth, Mother Gaia. Comes a connection to the true natural world. But the artifice of classical modernity, which is really seems to be the target of all of these kind of, I'm not saying this is like a conspiracy, I think it's a subconscious thing, right? Cultural phenomena. Classical modernity, the artifice of classical modernity is inauthentic, basically. The 50s are inauthentic. Soviet Union is inauthentic. You know, the ideal world of BioShock is inauthentic. True authenticity is this kind of confrontation with the real of the split, right? It's always a split. It's a split between the ideal and the real. Another way of understanding that is a split of the atom. It's a split in the atom. Because let me tell you something. Okay, you're opposing the real to the ideal. But I want to ask my audience a question. Can they make a Fallout game which doesn't have these references, these ironical references to the idealizations of the 1950s? Can we just have a Fallout game that's just like all shit? There's no irony at all. It's just like a shitty world with mutants. And there's no like happy Pip-Boy. There's none of that. It's just like you're just in this shitty post-apocalyptic world. Everything's completely rebuilt from scratch. Is that possible in the Fallout? Has that ever been done? I think maybe Dune. This is why I respect Dune. Not the latest Dune movies are anti-American British propaganda. Just want to let you know that. The old Dune movie that David Lynch directed, that's a real American Dune. I respect Dune because Dune doesn't seem to do that. Dune seems to be postmodern. Like it's not like dwelling in this kind of irony. It's beyond that already, right? So there are examples of it, which I commend for their bravery, but they're kind of few and far between, you know? You need both the ideal. It's like these American Philistines and British and whatever, all of these Russian, whatever you want, Philistines, they need the disappointment of the ideal to give expression to the real. You can't just have the real itself. You can't just have a Fallout game just full of those monsters. You need to juxtapose it to this fallen ideal, right? You can't have Stepford Wives that just begins with robots killing everyone. Then it's like just like iRobot or something, right? You need to kind of like have this juxtaposition. You need to have that. Also, what's another example? Because someone's saying this is just for children. You're right, there is something very adolescent about it. Children do love it. But so do American adults, and that's the problem. But Five Nights at Freddy's. Oh, Freddy looks like he's like a nice Freddy Fazbear. He's like, looks nice, but he's really bad. You know, it's a perfect example. Five Nights at Freddy's is like Chuck E. Cheese. Classic American staple of the American good. And then things go wrong. Good thing that's, yeah, you're right. Good thing that's actually evil. That's exactly what it is. But it's not just children. This was actually the staple of postmodern literature for adults. It's definitely not targeted toward children. Like in the 90s, for example, and late 80s. So, keep this in mind. Keep this in mind. Keep this in mind. We are talking about the splitting of the atom, metaphysically speaking, not just literally. We're talking about the splitting of the atom of being. We're talking about a split that is occurring at the heart of our sense of reality itself. That split being, the surface level of ideal institutions, top-down institutions primarily. We're talking about the era of radio, the era of top-down information environments and ecologies. One-way feedback loops. Well, how are they feedback loops, right? This is what is actually targeted here. The era of classical modernity. The era of trains. Go to point A, go to point B. There's no room for the complexity of the cars, right? This is classical modernity, right? So, I think on a few levels, on one level, The atomic age, the nuclear bomb, symbolizes the splitting of the atom of classical modernity, right? On the other hand, it literally is this. Because the splitting, the atomic, we have not developed a philosophy, we have not developed a culture, we have not developed an outlook or an ideology or an understanding of politics even fit for the atomic age. We don't understand atomic technologies. We don't understand the implications of them at a sociological, cultural level. The relations of production have not caught up to the forces of production. Atomic technologies, nuclear technology, I should put it, is something that represents a revolution in the productive forces, which all of human society is catching up toward. Our whole understanding of this, we are on the cusp of our next kind of Copernican revolution, if you will. We're not there yet, but we're on the cusp of it. We haven't caught up with it yet, right? We haven't caught up with the implication of the nuclear technology. And we will do this eventually through Marxism-Leninism, because guess what ideology is fit for the age of the atomic age? Marxism-Leninism. Marxism-Leninism and dialectical materialism are nuclear age outlooks. Without dialectical materialism, whose political form is Marxism-Leninism. That's what it is. Spoiler alert, right? That's at least my view. All those idiots who try to portray an idealized Soviet socialism only to subvert it as a form of irony are retards. Because the aesthetic of the Soviet era was socialist realism. It was never an idealization. They knew that their propaganda and art was ideologically charged, and it was intentionally so. If you want to understand more about this topic of Soviet socialist realism and how Western retards have gotten it wrong, just read Boris Groys, The Total Art of Stalinism and the Communist Postscript in particular are books you should read if you want to understand that. Yeah, one divides into two. What a great way of putting it. So, we are not caught up to the age of nuclear age technologies. Now, you're going to ask, Haas, what does this have to do with Barbie? Oh, it has everything to do with Barbie. See, I don't even have to watch these fucking movies to understand them. You get what I'm saying? But what is the Barbie movie about? Because I did look it up. The Barbie movie is about Barbie who's living in her, idealized Barbie world, her universe, and Barbie is not satisfied by this world. Things are not what they seem. So Barbie wants to escape and go to the real world. And the corporate wants to keep her in. So it's that same kind of Gnosticism that I've referred to before. So Barbie and Oppenheimer are coming out on the same day because they're about the same thing. A split of America's golden age. The split constitutive of America's golden age. The split of classical modernity in relation to which American existential turmoil has formed in relation to. America's existential turmoil, David Lynch's Twin Peaks, probably the best example, is about how we need to cope with the splitting of the atom, with the splitting of the ontology of classical modernity. Now, again, dialectical materialism already describes this split, because the split is the very object of dialectics. Dialectics already views positive being as constitutively split. So that's why irony is not an aesthetic of communism or of Marxism. Marxism doesn't care about irony. Marxism cares about a determinate, a concentration of opposites. It's already a given that the object is split in Marxism. So there's no need to give that ironical form, because we never make pretense to some kind of one-sided ideal in the first place. Barbie and Oppenheimer are about the same thing. They're about the same thing. It's always the split. So keep that in mind. Barbie in particular. Barbie is a film that's going to be a kind of yet another commentary on America's golden 1950s and how things really aren't what they seem in the 1950s. Barbie takes place, it's thematized to be in the 50s or the 60s when you watch it, right? Look at their sets, look at the costumes, look at what they're wearing. It's all from the 50s and 60s or whatever, right? So Barbie and Oppenheimer are about the same thing. Now here's why I'm not going to watch Oppenheimer, but I may watch Barbie. Okay, spoiler, I'm being forced to watch Barbie. Girlfriend's literally holding me at gunpoint, forcing me to fucking watch it. Do I want to watch it? I don't, but I'm being forced. Okay? I don't have a fucking choice. Sorry. But anyway, I will be watching Barbie. And while I'm watching Barbie, I'm going to literally be in the movie theater. I'm a Barbie girl in a Barbie world. Life and play. I'm going to be doing that whole thing. You know, that whole dance routine, everything. Because I'm so excited for it. Anyway, the reason I will not watch Oppenheimer, though, is because it's British propaganda. I'm going full LaRouche right now. Now, I don't think I agree with LaRouche on this topic, maybe. He would probably disagree with me about what I just told you. But what LaRouche is correct about is that we should not be trusting the British. And the guy who I don't want to trust in particular is the MI6 agent, Christopher Nolan. And although I like The Dark Knight, I saw that movie as a warning. Christopher Nolan is a premier aesthetician of the British Empire. He's the aesthetics of the British Empire. What Christopher Nolan is going to do in Oppenheimer is he's going to try and fit this nuclear event into the mold of the British aesthetic of classical British metaphysics, which are reductionistic, which are backwards looking back into the past. Isn't the movie literally in black and white? He's going to basically try and wrap up the splitting of the atom as just one other event in the chronology of British metaphysics, which is a cope, and it's a falsehood. And I categorically reject the possibility of Oppenheimer. It's a falsehood. If you want to see the effects of the atomic age, don't watch Oppenheimer. Watch fucking Transformers. Watch any cheap example of mass culture that's meant to appeal to stupid audiences. And there you will get an understanding of the implications of what Oppenheimer was doing. Don't fucking watch this gay movie where they put it in black. Oh my god. The nuclear. You can't. The form of subjectivity that Christopher Nolan is trying to imply with his Oppenheimer movie is itself a form of subjectivity rendered impossible by the very event the movie is attempting to document and record. The nuclear age itself erases the possibility of the subjectivity that Christopher Nolan is trying to imply by the movie Oppenheimer. So everyone who's watching Oppenheimer with their nose in the air, thinking it's really deep, and oh, the bomb. You are false! You are falsehood! You are falsehood! You are posturing! You're wrong! You're a fucking pseudo-intellectual retard. You're not an intellectual, and I'm gonna personally beat the shit out of you, you fucking idiot. You're wrong! You cannot give expression to the splitting of the atom without fiction. If there's no element of fiction, it's fake. The splitting of the atom is an ontological event that is about the splitting of the modern Cartesian subject itself. Without an element of fiction, it's completely impossible. Without giving expression to the virtual, the real of virtuality itself, you could never possibly give any literary or artistic expression to the creation of the nuclear bomb. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles does it better than Oppenheimer. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles records and gives artistic significance to the creation of nuclear weapons better than Oppenheimer or any other gay black and white film Christopher Nolan could ever make. So, on an artistic level, I categorically reject the possibility of Oppenheimer. I completely reject it. And I will not be seeing it for that reason. I'm sick of the British and their gay propaganda. People finding it so profound. No, it's not black and white, but it's filmed in this stupid old style of film that Christopher Nolan, what is that old style of film? Oh, I'll talk about Napoleon too. Don't worry, we're gonna get to it. Can you relate three-body problem to this topic? Oh, it's so related actually, but I can't. It'll take too long. The three-body problem is an utterly beautiful, beautiful movie. Sorry, beautiful series. Can't wait to see Netflix fuck it up. Chinese one was really good. Sound of Freedom I haven't seen yet. But let me continue talking about Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. It's not possible. He's coping. My review of that film, without seeing it, I will not see it, is that it's a cope. Christopher Nolan's coping. You cannot give expression to that event in the way he's trying to. It's like he's giving expression to it Yet the thing he's giving expression to made that impossible already. That form of posturing. It's just see, Christopher Nolan is a bluffer. He's just a pretentious bluffer. He just bluffs. His whole aesthetic is bluffing. He never pays for it. It's just bluffing. He creates a pretense to something never fulfilled. This is the truth. Is it a possibility of authentically capturing that event in film? No. Not in a realist way. In a non-realist fashion, yes. If you use fiction, yes. But in a realist way, absolutely not. There's no way to do it with realism.